This is the second hopper in a series of watercolor exercises. I use hopper to interpret watercolor for students early on in the teaching experience. It's a good way to think about the medium and the elements of painting, value and relationships, without having to come up with your own image. So I use early on I use some Edward Hoppers, I use some Matisse, some early Matisse, several different types of artists who we interpret in watercolor. We interpret in three values, and we get a language of a vocabulary that we can speak together about painting. I stress value in the early parts of the painting process, and I stress getting a strong example of the each of the colors in watercolor, the primaries and secondaries, how to use them fully charged without getting opaque. So and of course we're stressing some brush work at the same time, because brushes in watercolor are used differently than brushes in oils or in other mediums. There's no real substance to watercolor. There is only the fluidity of it. So you're moving fluids on a page and you're making gestural strokes with the brush. Watercolor brushes are extremely good at this, and you have to learn how to use them. It's different than an oil painting brush. It's different than a pencil. So we're going to take this Edward Hopper and we're going to interpret it in three values in watercolor. I have an old painting of my own here. I'm going to use the other side of it for this exercise. And let's see what happens. This is the palette. This is my dirty palette, and I'm mixing up ultramarine blue to start with, just as some place to begin. Could be any color actually. I use a limited palette. Basically a warm and cool of each of the primary colors. Normally alizarin crimson and cadmium red for reds. Phthalo blue and cobalt blue for blues. Lemon yellow and cadmium yellow or gamboge for yellows. And that gives me a warm and cool of each primary. And I know in high school or in college they teach that from the primaries you can mix all the secondaries, all the other colors, but truthfully pigments aren't perfect primaries, so you really can't. But with a warm and cool of each of the primaries you really can. You can get a good purple, and you can get a good orange, and you can get all the secondaries with full chroma. So I'm letting myself play with the color. It's not, this is a black and white image I'm working from. The hopper I'm working from is black and white, so I'm not influenced by his color at all. And I'm allowing myself to play. I like to play with color. I think it's a great joy to really think of it as a game or as play. When I get to the little figures down on the bottom, I'm going to paint around them. Leave a space for them. The lighter ones anyway. Pick up some of the excess fluid that's pooling. I'm working at a slight angle, so all the excess is moving down to the bottom, so I know where it is. You get a beautiful surface that way. Just one film of paint, you might say. Just one film of paint on the paper. Now, Hopper is very instructive as a designer, I think, when you begin to see some of the games that he plays with his design. There's a alternation of lights and darks everywhere in Hopper. Very interesting way to make a picture. How to make your lights and darks work, you might say, and he alternates them. I'm going to pick up the page and guide the excess in the direction kind of that I'm painting in. If I make mistakes in this, which I do, I always make a few mistakes. I'm not concerned about mistakes. This is a game. It's a game of design, of watercolor playing. So in terms of some of the ways that he designs, as I was speaking about earlier, if you look at the chimneys on top of this little building, in fact I'll show you in the Hopper itself before we finish. We have a small one and a large one, and he repeats that theme throughout this picture. So he takes themes, visual themes, and repeats them so the eye will follow them. They're not really obvious to you unless you're thinking in terms of design. He's got these chevron shapes. These are called interlocking shapes. These forms that create the movement back in space. Bring your eye back to the laundry, which has interlocking edges also. So I'm letting the paint flow together, go where it wants to, not guiding it too much. This is a chimney on this building. You'll notice it's just the opposite of these. And then there's little sticks over here that are a repeat again of the same thing. Two figures, which are a repeat of the same thing, smaller one, taller one, smaller one, taller one, smaller, taller, but reversed as they go across. Very clever pieces of design. So this is the basic pattern in this image. I haven't got all the way over to the edge on the right, but again, I don't really care. It's about using the medium in an interesting way, color-wise and visually, of getting used to laying it down and leaving it alone, which is a really important element of watercolor painting. And I'm picking up a few of the puddles, the excesses. I think the brush, a thirsty brush, is the best tool for that, the most sensitive tool. So as some of you know, if you let those pools dry in the painting, they'll make a blossom. The dry parts will be set up, the wet parts will expand up and make a blossom like that. They're in all watercolor paintings. They're in Sargent and Homer and all the great painters, Emil Nolde. And this is the first step, so we're going to let it dry now. Just take a step back, let it dry, and then add another 2 layers of color. So here we have the dried first stage of the Edward Hopper interpretation in direct watercolor. Now we're going to put the second stage on, which will be basically the light values. Light values will contain the shapes that haven't already been stated. They will go over the mid-value pattern that already is there without worrying too much. This is like the coloring book part of the painting. It's just laid on and not worried about too much. So the sky will be a light blue in this case, although we can make it anything. Maybe we'll play a little bit, but light blue is always a good one. And I'll use the sky to create the edge of the top of the building that hadn't been stated yet, like so. No clouds in the sky in this one, so it makes our job easier. I'm changing the color a little bit. Watercolor loves to change and flow, so you might as well let it. And I'm going to take now some just clear water, gradation in the sky, and let what is there fluidly drip down. And then the ground, it's actually quite cool in this picture, but I'm going to add a little warmth to the ground for the feeling of sunlight. So I'm taking just a touch of in this case cadmium orange and a little yellow. These are very light. A lot of water in the paint mixture compared to the first step through, which was much more filled with pigment than water. And we're just gonna, again, we're just glazing in a way on this part. It's containing the whites in a sense this time around. Make sure changing the color of the whites. Picking up, again before I stop, picking up poodles, some color on the roof even though it's light. And allowing just for playfulness in this, not trying to be too perfect. I'm trying to do, you know, maybe 60% of what I'm thinking of. I'm not trying to be accurate. I'm trying to cover and control whites. Get rid of the whites basically, or color the whites. Color the whites is more the control and color. And then we'll leave it again until it dries. So the only whites I've left, in fact I think I do want to add to these, but I've left the laundry white here. And I'm going to just add a touch or two into there for variation. This is laundry, by the way, if you didn't know what it was. Laundry hanging on the line in the background. You'll notice I haven't put any windows in the buildings. That will come the next step, which will be the darks. And then we'll have a 3-value painting. We'll have stated this painting in 3 values. And it's again, an exercise and an approximation and just a playful game in watercolor. The paint is put down directly and not messed with when possible. So let's let this dry for a few minutes and we'll come back and put the last value on. So here's the hopper entirely dry and ready for the last step, which will be the dark values, the darker values. They'll remain transparent. They won't be really dark. They won't be dense. They won't be, but they will add now a level of detail. I think of the darks in many ways as accents, almost like the spices used in cooking, put on at the end to add dimension to the image and to add finish. Let's try it, and we'll do the same process of playing with the color, changing the color as we go. So in the case of, for example, windows, which we didn't put into the depths of the buildings, we're going to add those now by getting another level of dark and really painting them as negatives, negative shapes. remember to try to change the color as I go. Variety is the spice of life kind of thing. Each window should be different. One of the great things I like about Hopper is the variety that he uses in every one of his windows is a different form, treated differently. And we'll try to do that too. So this dark that I'm using is not very dark, but it'll be a step darker than the mid value that was there. And I'm just going to try not to put them where I don't need them. So there's a selective process here of choosing how much information, additional information to add. I think you have a lot of possibilities of choice here. I'm going to try not to do little tiny details. I'll change brushes when I would do smaller details. So I'll just do the larger shapes at this point. This big brush, this large brush. The reason, an advantage I think of doing the windows this way is that they remain part of the piece. They don't pop out and separate. I don't have little pieces that I'm trying to fit together into one large shape. They tend to read as a unit already by themselves because of the big large shape that went behind them. Large simple forms. So there's more you could do, I suppose. You can refine, but this is again is an exercise, meant to be an exercise in my mind. So I'm not going to try to go for everything. Just for the major themes and shapes. We'll stop right there and let it dry. See what it looks like. They do change as they dry, so it's good to stop before you think you're finished to look at it. Let it dry and look at it.